Well, welcome everyone. My name is Eric Cave. I am the Director of Next Gen Ministries for the Pacific Northwest Conference. Really glad you joined us today. We have our friend Chris Haughee here. He's one of our covenant pastors currently serving at Desert Springs Covenant Church in Pasco, Washington. And he's also on staff with Intermountain Ministries in Helena, Montana, in charge of church relations. So Chris, that's kind of a complicated job title and description. Why don't you let us know a little bit more about who you are and tell us about your work slash
Yeah,
ministry setting.
absolutely. Thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it. Yeah, serving in two different states and two different part-time ministries it does get a little complicated. So let me explain. Up until the pandemic, I was serving as the chaplain at Intermountain Children's Home, a residential care center for severely mentally ill and challenged youth, those that had some significant challenges before them and had to be removed from their homes. My history with the covenant kind of ties into my start there at Intermountain. I've been a covenant licensed minister since 2013. I'd started at Intermountain in 2012. And then after 8 years of learning and growing in that ministry, and as a part of that, getting my doctorate in trauma-informed ministry. And then once I came to the Prosser area, it was clear that the Desert Springs congregation in Pasco was kind of struggling. And so I've stepped into that role as a part-time minister, and God's doing some great things and is working in both of these ministries.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you're there. So you do a lot of work around trauma sensitive ministry and in ministries with trauma sensitivity. That's what we're talking about today. So explain to us, if you could, what is trauma sensitive ministry and why is it important?
Yeah, so trauma sensitive ministry, or sometimes you'll hear the term trauma informed ministry or trauma informed care, is something that's been around, kind of had its infancy in the mid 90s with a study called the ACE study, which is Adversity in Childhood Experiences. Trauma is something that is any experience which the individual feels is life-threatening. So whether or not the actual experience is indeed life-threatening, if you're 2 years old and you're convinced that mom is gonna kill you, when she threatens you that way, then that's trauma. Rather, whether or not that actually is going to take place. So when we have that rewiring of our brain and the effects that lead out of that, then it only makes sense that if we are thinking about ourselves as pastors or ministers, our church bodies, if we are working with people that have experienced trauma, how can we do so effectively? How can we communicate the gospel effectively? So in trauma-informed care, there's something that are referred to as the 4 R's. And real quickly, it's realize the widespread impact of trauma and what potential paths to recovery might be. The second R is recognize what the signs and symptoms of trauma are. The third R is respond. So if you have that knowledge, then responding in a way that you're trying to fully integrate that knowledge into policies, procedures, and practices. So that's taking it from the theoretical to the practical. And then the fourth R is a trauma-informed care model actively seeks to avoid re-traumatization. So if you understand that certain things, one of the buzzwords that's been out there for a while is triggers. You understand that something is going to trigger a certain response in an individual, that they're going to have that response, then finding ways to mitigate those issues in a ministry setting. So that's a mouthful, but one of the things that I'm proud of is that my doctorate in trauma-informed ministry was, as far as I know, one of the first in 2017. I helped produce a curriculum that was kind of the first of its kind in introducing these concepts to the church. Being trauma sensitive is basically just about knowing your people and knowing the impact that trauma is having on them or has had on them.
Well, that's excellent. You've already kind of mentioned some things here, but I want to just open up to see if there's anything more. Like, what can churches and leaders do to grow in trauma sensitive ministry?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to realize that it's not that scary to delve into this, to do a little bit of learning and seeking it out. For instance, the covenant has been great in recognizing, for instance, the trauma that affects our minority populations. Kind of looking at racial trauma and the effects of that, and why, if you're going to lean into that space, you need to set aside some of your preconceptions that we are all approaching things the same way, and do some learning. One of the insights that has come through a lot of the research is that trauma affects all of us. And so it's not something in trauma is no respecter of persons, in a sense that regardless of your race or your background or your gender identity or any of the things that we might categorize people as, we have all had some interaction with trauma, and it's left its imprint on us. Of course, the biblical term for a lot of trauma we might think of as sin, or sin that has been has affected us, someone else's poor choices. But it's a lot more complicated than that. And so just understanding some of the science behind it can be really helpful.
That's good. Well, you mentioned already the article that you wrote, but just highlight for us, what other resources do you offer, that you make available? And we'll list them below, but maybe highlight a couple of those, and let us know, like, if our leaders wanted to engage with you on this, how would they go about doing so?
Yeah, so it'd be great to connect with other ministers in the covenant. My email is just Haughee, my last name, Haughee. You should see it on the screen there, at gmail.com. So that's pretty simple. You can just reach out via email. The website for Intermountain Ministry is not getting as updated as much these days, but it's got 8+ years of material on there, and that's intermountainministry.org. You'll see that link below. The curriculum that I wrote is available either through Intermountain, through reaching out to us, or you can get it on Amazon. I've got a copy right here. It's called Bruised Reeds and Smoldering Wicks, and it's an 8-week Bible study. So you could do it in adult Sunday school. There's been some high school Sunday school classes or youth groups that have done it, and just kind of walk through the materials, and it introduces there's a ton of other helpful materials that I'll make sure to send you so that you can include them in the notes below.
Excellent. Well, I really do hope that people do reach out to you and engage with you on these. I encourage everyone listening and watching to consider how you could grow, what you can learn about trauma sensitive ministry, and maybe consider doing so through a connection with Chris. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, please do reach out to me, because I'd love to connect to anyone that's interested.
I already messed it up.
Hey, see, that takes the pressure off. Fantastic.
Yep.